our super ambassador of VAB, which we are truly grateful for you to be part of our community, and the stage is all yours. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen here. So good morning, good afternoon, and I'm guessing there might be somebody for whom good evening is appropriate. So why do successful companies that exhibit best practices continually get caught off guard, surprised, and unaware? Why do boards of directors and leadership teams who know what they need to change to be better not change? How do we break this pattern so organizations can learn to thrive in these environments? Well, I've been asking these questions for a number of years and finding the answers to these, sharing them with clients, helping clients come up with their own answers, and enabling them to thrive in turbulence has been my mission. As a chief catalyst and navigator of J. Weiser Consulting, I work with organizations, board members, and leadership teams to galvanize and mobilize leaders in their companies to break out of this pattern of barely surviving in the face of disruption and in change. So in this morning or this afternoon session, we're going to talk about first why governance and leadership is tougher than ever before. I'm going to introduce a leadership capability model, the 5 leadership superpowers, and talk about, thirdly, how that can be deployed in the boardroom, in the C-suite, to improve performance. We've all seen a lot of these names before. Some of these companies have destroyed enormous amounts of value. Some of them, many of them are no longer here. And typically, I say typically, each of these has lost value because of a governance failure. And more often than not, it was something that was foreseeable and it was something that was preventable. The top reasons for governance failures are failure to identify, assess, and appropriately manage a risk. 2 is a failure in strategy in terms of it not being overseen, in terms of it not adapting. 3rd is board relationship dynamics. What actually goes on in the boardroom or in the C-suite? How well is that team working together? You know, if we think about Theranos and the false claims, the signals were there, but they were not addressed. We've all heard about the safety issues at Boeing. And shockingly, before 2019, and that was after a couple of the airplane crashes on the 737-700, they previously did not have a safety committee or any safety experts on their board. And even with that, they're still running into issues, and safety still seems to be a systemic problem. So we're in a bit of a tough spot. Some of us feel like we're a crew boat that should be on a calm river in the middle of the stormy seas. And for some, it's that proverbial burning platform. Neither of these pictures is good, nor is it a sustainable place to be. So how did we get here? First and foremost, it's the perma-crisis environment we're in. It's not just one incident or 2. It's coming at us from all directions. And they're interconnected, they're interdependent, and they're spreading fast. 2, we're in an environment of ever accelerating change, whether it's new technologies, new business models, new issues. We're facing increasing competition very often from places we never expected it from. Stakeholders' demands on boards are increasing. I don't need to tell you all of the things that are going on. You've read about it, you've experienced it, and some of you have spoken to me about it. What we need to realize is that the risk of inaction is incredibly high. We saw on the previous slide what happens when you're not paying attention to these issues, and why poor leadership, poor governance, lack of awareness, until it's too late, can be a problem, especially if you're putting your head in the sand. I kind of call that willful ignorance. You're not future fit. Again, that firefighting isn't sustainable. Preserving the status quo, leading the way we have, won't work. Boards and leaders are challenged like never before. So I'm going to do a couple of polls. If you can join Slido at slido.com, and the number you need to put in is 295-3260, and I believe Anna was putting that in chat.
Yes, I just put it in if anyone just wants to copy paste either the number or the link, it's there in the chat.
So you should see a survey. So does what I've been talking about, does this feel familiar? Are you close to this? Do you think this is us? We used to be like this? Or it's not us at all? Please go ahead and vote. We'll give you about a minute or so to do so. And if everybody could please vote.
I'm also adding now a clickable link if it's easier for anyone.
Thank you. So we'll give you another 30 seconds. Everybody would get their votes in. Ten seconds left. All right, so let's look at these results. 71% are saying we are close to this. You're feeling this pain. 12% are saying this is us. So combined, that's 83%. 12% are saying we used to be like this, so you're starting to make that change. And only 6% are saying we're just fine. So clearly, this is an issue for the majority of people on this call. And for that matter, because we're probably all high performers to some degree, is it's even worse elsewhere. So now a second question. And that question is, given your organization's situation, is this urgent to address? We must start now. Somewhat urgent, we must start to address in the next 3 to 6 months, or we're fine. We can wait till the end of the year and revisit. So we'll give you another minute here. Another 15 seconds. If everybody would please get their votes in. So if we look at this, I think I've done my job. I've created a little bit of that pit in your stomach. I've turned the heat up to high. Almost half are saying we need to start now. And the other half is saying we should start in the next 3 to 6 months. Now, I'd caution that a little bit in terms of waiting has a cost and waiting has risk. The one thing we know is only 10% of you don't think this is urgent. And you're either in a very good place and you're well prepared, or maybe you're not seeing the same thing everybody else is. Now, I promise this is the lowest you're going to feel today. It's all onward and upward from here. What if I said I've developed a leadership capability framework specifically to address the challenges of the world we just described? A capability framework that guides and enables you and your organizations, your board, your leadership team to navigate through the turbulence and thrive versus barely surviving if you do it all. I suspect you'd be interested. Now, before we jump into the model, are there any comments or questions? Let's see if I can see the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to keep on moving. So there we go. So new capabilities are needed to thrive. And when we think about this, because we know what we're doing very often is not working, it's not enough. So with the 5 leadership superpowers, first of all, it's an overlay set of capabilities. You still need core leadership skills. You still need to motivate people, have a vision, set a strategy, set goals, make allocation decisions, and so on. But the 5 leadership superpowers are an overlay that help you have the impact with those core leadership skills you want to have. Each of the 5 superpowers is about navigating a tension that leaders in whitewater and turbulence need to address. And it's not just doing one side or the other. It really goes back to having both and thinking, because if you do anything less than that, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a moment, is that if you only focus on one side of the superpower versus the other, you're going to find yourself in hot water. And you'll see as we go through this, that this model applies across industry, across functions, geography, in the boardroom, in the C-suite, and in the organization. The first superpower is being a present futurist. So it's someone who has a robust understanding of the present, but also pays attention to trends, to signals, and visions of the future. If you only focus on one side or the other, you're going to be missing something, and you're not going to see. You're going to have blind spots. The second superpower is being an experienced learner. So the experience and expertise that got us here was great. However, it's insufficient going forward. So you need to combine that with curiosity and with learning. Third is being a prepared risk taker. It's recognizing that risk taking is a part of business. And whether you do something or don't do something, risk is involved. So it's about taking smart risks. But at the same time, it's important to be prepared, to be risk aware. Fourth is being a strategic executor. So it's balancing strategy and execution, strategy and operations, long-term and short-term, and realizing they're linked. And the fifth superpower is being an accountable collaborator. It's recognizing that collaboration across functions, across organizational boundaries is essential, and that teams should be accountable for outcomes. So we're going to dive into each one of these, and we're going to see how they play out in practice. So with the first superpower, being a present futurist, a perfect example is Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors. Now, she understood when she came on board what was going on in the automotive market. GM was coming out of the financial crisis, and they were trying to get their footing. She strengthened the core automotive business and started to focus on technological advances and really paying attention to customers. She foresaw that electric vehicles were going to be the future and heading in that direction because of climate change and other reasons. And she set out to launch close to 30 electric vehicles globally by 2025. They're going to be close, they're not going to be quite there. Uptake's taking a little bit longer. And about the company being carbon neutral. So it was that ability to understand where we are and know where the industry is heading. And you can see some of the capabilities there. The next one is being an experienced learner. So Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, he's never been one to rest on his laurels. As a leader, he's always learning. He's asking questions. He has a lot of institutional knowledge that he leverages, but he's also open to challenging it himself or by others. So because of how he's learned, and he's got this great background in engineering and computer science, but because of his forward thinking and his learning, they've gone to the cloud and to AI. He shifted Microsoft's culture and leadership from a know-it-all, where leaders were expected to have all the answers, to a learn-it-all culture, where it's okay for leaders to say, I need your help. I don't know what the answer is, but we together can figure it out. He encourages debate to get the best ideas and provides a safe place to doing that. I do something similar when I'm working with leaders, is providing that safe place, a place to learn, to be able to challenge their thinking and other members of the leadership team and board, and to foster the debate that very often doesn't happen, but that needs to. Christine Lagarde is a great example of being a prepared risk taker. Now, I'll say that with one caveat. That's going by more reading than living in Europe. So I know some of you might have potentially a different opinion. But as president of the European Central Bank in June of 2023, speaking at, I believe it was their 9th conference, she talked about the need to strengthen resilience in a changing geopolitical landscape. She talked about 2 broad shifts. The first one, which we are continuing to see, is rising geopolitical tensions. And even more so now, if you think about the Middle East, if you think about some of the stuff that's going on with Putin and Russia, and pressures on weakening global trade. So there are a lot of impacts. But she also had a vision of the future that she wanted to work towards, where the European community could counteract some of these uncertainties by reinforcing openness in the region, increasing collective security. Now, as somebody in this position, she's been pivotal in navigating through global financial crises while implementing policies to stimulate growth and at the same time stabilize economies. So it's balancing that risk with prudence in preparation. And if you think about it, preparedness dampens risk. You recover faster, and you're able to pounce on opportunities and grow. The 4th superpower is being a strategic executor. And now Ed Bastian, the CEO of Delta, is a great example, and I've spoken about him for a number of years. When COVID first hit, airlines lost 90% of their business in the matter of a week, sometimes more. Bastian immediately went out and communicated in an all-employee town hall. And he said, we've never dealt with something like this before, but we as a team can figure this out. He talked about 3 principles. And before he got to the 3 principles, he said, we're throwing out the flight plan. We're throwing out the budget. It's no longer relevant given the environment we're in. We're going to be guided by 3 principles. Number 1, protect and serve our customers and our employees. That is job number 1. Job number 2 is to protect cash. We don't know how long this is going to go on for, so we need to pay attention. And third, which is something most companies did not say, is we need to protect the future. That guided so many of Delta's decisions, and it was something that very few, if any, other leaders said, protect the future. So how did that play out? Delta offered early retirement instead of having mass terminations. They furloughed employees. They maintained contact and communication. They were open and transparent. Now, when travel started to come back, and all the airlines were struggling to ramp up, to bring their people back, Delta came back faster than all of its competitors. Now, they've had their bumps along the way, but as a result, they've maintained high ratings for service. They've been rated as a top airline in 2022 and again in 2023. So it's having bullseyes, thinking about operations, but also thinking about the future. In the 5th superpower, I'm going to talk about an organization, and that's the Mayo Clinic. So if you think about being an accountable collaborator, how does the Mayo Clinic exhibit this? Well, first, if you are a patient and you're coming in with an issue, instead of having to go to the different disciplines to get information in a treatment plan, the disciplines come to you. So there's that multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach. Now they're also collaborating with health systems. So they're going outside the organization across the country to offer broader access to share information. They're partnering with industry, GE Healthcare, Google, for how they can come out with better, more advanced technology, devices, ways to look at information. Collaboration is at its core. And what they're accountable for, if you're part of this collaboration, is sharing research and the outcomes, improving access, improving patient outcomes, curing cancer. So that is a perfect example of what it means to be an accountable collaborator. Now, if you're doing this and you take all of the 5 superpowers together, these are the outcomes you'll get. 1, greater value for customers as their needs are anticipated and met. Employees are enabled, energized, engaged, less likely to leave because they feel valued and part of a bigger purpose. Your partners want to collaborate with you because you have shared goals. And the same thing applies to internal partners, internal functions. The communities and society around are healthier because you're following responsible, ethical business practices. And as a result, shareholders are richly rewarded. So let me, before I jump into how this applies to governance, let me pause there and check in chat and see if anybody has any questions.
we have any questions in the chat so far. Some LinkedIn profiles that have been shared and connections happening. But does anybody have any questions for Jay at this point in the presentation about the 5 leadership superpowers? Any examples that you would like to share about those in action as well, I think would be really interesting to hear.
Absolutely. We've got a quiet crowd.
If not, we can continue for now and come back to questions shortly.
That sounds good.
Jay, it's Jim Cornelson.
Yes.
I think boards very often are focused on the present. I don't know how much attention is focused on the future in the typical board setting, because they have quarterly goals or they have immediate crises within the company. And I think that potentially neglect some of the discussion that should be going on regarded to the future. Do you have a comment?
Well, part of the duty of a board is long-term shareholder value and value creation in a sustainable manner. And if the only thing you're focused on is the short term, we've seen what the impact of that is in a lot of the companies that I've noted, and companies that we've seen are struggling. If you think about, Boeing, the focus on productivity in the immediate has led to safety issues. If you think about, something like a Silicon Valley bank where they weren't paying attention to risk. They were trying to grow. They were thinking about their niche in the business. So that future value, that thinking about the future, the only way you're going to do that is if you take some time. You're a present futurist. You're a strategic executor. Because otherwise, you're going to find yourself stuck on that burning platform, stuck on the crew boat in the ocean. So let's keep on going. So when we think about governance, Didier Cosson, who's a professor at IMD, talks about 4 pillars that I believe are the foundation for board effectiveness, and for that matter, C-suite effectiveness. The first thing is, do you have the right people, the quality of people, diversity of thinking, the right level of focus and dedication? Are they getting the right information, not just what they're given, but from internal and external sources? Are they seeking out the information they need? Are they asking the questions to get the information they need to better govern and lead? Do you have the right structures and processes? We talked about Boeing not having a safety committee. Companies are, now looking at and saying, well, is it just a compensation committee and just compensation for the CEO? Or is it more of a people committee as you look at talent, as you look at culture? So broadening some of the mandates. And it's also about group dynamics and board culture. How does the board work together? Is it open? Is it transparent? Are people free to ask questions? So as you think about this, think about those 4 pillars and think about where the superpowers come into play. Now, with everything that's going on around us, this perma-crisis environment, stakeholder interests, governance and leadership expectations are increasing. There's an expanding array of risks and responsibility. Boards and leadership teams need to transform. They need to shift. So if you look at some of these domains on the left, and the yellow is where we're coming from. Some of us might still be in the yellow. The green is where I believe we need to go to, and where organizations, where governance is adding value have started to do this. So if you think about crisis response, we come from a time of reacting in the moment, of being unprepared, about being caught off guard. We want and we should be responding intentionally, thoughtfully, because we're prepared. We're moving from a focus just on the shareholders to shareholders and stakeholders, with the recognition that unless stakeholders see value in their different dimensions, whether it's customers, employees, community, you don't have a sustainable business, and shareholders don't get the rewards. So these are mutually reinforcing. What's the role of the board? You know, I've often heard the phrase, noses in, fingers out. For a lot of boards, this meant they were deferential to the CEO. They were more passive. They lightly looked at things. I think noses in and fingers out needs to be redefined. I think it's about heads up. You're not just sniffing. You're looking. You're listening. You at times need to manage your altitude. Sometimes 20,000-foot view is great. Other times when there are issues, there are pressing concerns, there's a future to think about, sometimes you need to dive in. You need to zoom in. You need to better understand these issues. If you think about how the group dynamic works, is everybody coming in with their own agenda? Is it kind of ad hoc? What comes up, what gets discussed? Or is it more intentional, more proactive, that the board is fit for purpose, fit for the times, fit for the strategy, and fit for the future? If you think about board composition, we're going from, somebody made the comment to me a few days ago, stale, pale, and male, where it's retired CEOs and CFOs. If you're a private company, it's friends and family, legacy thinking. And we need to move towards a board that's qualified based on their diversity of experiences and expertise, that have different backgrounds and bring different viewpoints. And if we think about diversity, moving from look and think the same to look and, more importantly, think differently, cognitive diversity, so people can see from different perspectives, different viewpoints. You're reducing your blind spots and you're bringing better thinking to the table. And it's also about what's the information you look at. There needs to be more and better, mostly better, more thorough information coming from different sources, so board members and leaders get a fuller picture. I love this quote from Alvin Toffler: "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." And unlearn is the toughest of all. What do we need to let go of? What do we need to stop doing so we get unstuck? Leaders and boards have a choice to make. We don't get to choose our circumstances. We do get to choose how we respond. When we look at our leadership team, when we look at ourselves on the board, are we acting as captains? Are we stepping up? Are we helping to guide the organization through the storm? Are we recognizing what we can control, what we can shape, and actually acting on it? So that's a whole lot better than being a captive, playing the victim, going to the bottom of the boat and leaving yourself at the mercy of the waves. So think for a moment. What can you control and shape? And as you think about and jot down a few of the things that you can control and shape, ask yourselves, is our organization actually acting on these things? Or are they missing opportunities where they can control and shape where the organization is going, how it's impacted, how it responds instead of reacts? The second thing, it's important to see, think, and do differently. You know, Einstein said, doing the same thing over and over and expecting something different is insanity. I think we've all had insanity phases in our lives. When we talk about seeing differently, it's about hearing differently, sniffing differently. It's looking at things from different perspectives, from different stakeholder perspectives, zooming in and zooming out. Now, it's great that we get that information in, but what do we do with it? So we need to think differently, different frameworks, different business models, different mindsets, more growth mindset, positive mindset. And a key part of thinking differently, you know, if we go back to the 5 leadership superpowers, is moving away from binary thinking. I can do this or I can do that. I can choose to exploit or I can choose to explore. You need both and thinking, where you're finding that balance between the two, or you're finding a third way that's even better. Now, seeing and thinking differently is great, but it doesn't matter unless you change what you do, because that's where value gets created. And part of changing what you do is becoming more prepared and more resilient. That is important on a personal, a board, a C-suite, and organizational level. Let's make it personal for a moment. We are better prepared at home because we have a fire extinguisher, a smoke detector. You probably have extra water in the house, toilet paper, duct tape, WD-40. You in your buildings do fire drills. Your kids have fire drills. Those are all preparation. What do you do in the company to be better prepared, to be more resilient? So now the question is, how do you do this? And that's where we come back to the superpowers, because the superpowers help you see, think, and do differently. The superpowers help you improve governance and improving board and executive team effectiveness. So let's talk about how. Well, the present futurist is contextually aware. They're anticipating, they're envisioning, they're wargaming. And as a result, the boards and leadership teams have fewer surprises. They can reduce the uncertainty they face. Doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but think about this. A lot of uncertainty comes from not paying attention, from blind spots, and the superpowers help you avoid that. The experienced learner, that continuous learning and unlearning. There's been so much written about creating that psychological safety so people can challenge. It's about inviting and fostering that debate and diversity of opinion. So all of us are smarter than any one of us. And a board or a leadership team that has a learning culture, a growth mindset, can adapt, can thoughtfully respond, doesn't shy away from uncertainty or disruptions. They can embrace them, manage them, and work through them. And one of the things that's most interesting with some of the economic tightening is very often learning is seen as discretionary, and it's often the first thing that's cut. But in this type of environment, it's the last thing that should be cut, because if you want to change your trajectory, you need to change what people are learning, how they're thinking. And there are different ways of doing this. Doesn't necessarily cost money. It can be on the job. It can be online. There's so much out there. With being a prepared risk taker, typically in the surveys and assessments that I've done, this is the weakest link of all. And why is that? Because very often people say, oh, I don't have time to get prepared. I don't want to spend money paying for things that might never happen. Well, we've seen the cost and risk associated with being completely unprepared, where we can avoid errors by being more risk aware, by looking at things as a portfolio, by being more future ready and resilient. And this helps because you can make faster, better, risk-informed decisions. You want to be playing to win, not to avoid losing. And being a prepared risk taker is critical for that. As a strategic executor, a board that balances strategy and operations, a leadership team that keeps their eye on both balls, that balance the long and short term, that recognizing strategy isn't something you do once a year, that it needs to be a continuous and adaptive, flexible process because the circumstances around us are changing so quickly. So how does that help? Being vision and purpose driven, being adaptive in how you manage and adjust strategy. The companies that are agile and nimble are the ones that survive and are the ones that thrive. And when you think about being an accountable collaborator, it's about breaking down those silos. It's about creating that high-performing team. It's about the very board dynamic issues that we talked about earlier. We go back to the governance failures that we talked about. Which superpowers could have helped us avoid each of these? Take a moment and if you can put in chat, look at these or come up with others and say which superpowers could have helped you, could have helped that leadership team, that board. So I'd like to, hear what you think, see what you think on these and how some of these could be avoided. So if you would put that in the chat.
We just have one request to go quickly back to the last slide to see the superpowers again. I think
Sure.
Answers if that's possible, Jay.
There we go.
Hey Jay, this is Vipin. Hey,
Yes.
first of all, I like this framework of superpowers. And I was thinking, I think as leaders, most of the individuals on this call, I think they will agree that they exhibit these paradoxical characteristics, and that's what has made them successful in their leadership, right? I think what I'm learning from, I think the way you described it is this may be a great framework for us to apply in context of our executive teams or our board teams and see as a team, are we exhibiting these characteristics? And so it's a great framework to kind of do a check. And do we have all these characteristics either through one or obviously through multiple individuals? So I think that's what I learned through this, and I like that about this framework. So thank you for sharing it.
Thank you for your comments. So we're seeing a couple of answers. I think Chris nailed two of these, with Kodak being a present futurist and Theranos being a prepared risk taker in terms of what they ask questions about, what they should have known about. Let's see, any other comments? All right, so if you think about these, again, most of these could have been avoided. Now, let's take a step further and say, where does this get applied? So first of all, the superpowers have a multiplier effect. they support and reinforce one another. I would say boards of directors and executive teams, so thinking collectively, should strive for proficiency in all five because that eliminates so many of the blind spots. But individually, a board member or executive team member, I would say, should be proficient in at least 1 to 3 and appreciate the rest. Of course, there are some people who are ambidextrous and can actually be proficient or strong in all 5. But it's that power of 5, how they support and inform one another. It's like being CrossFit. So when we apply this to board governance, and you think about the different processes that boards get involved in, which you can see on the left, and you think about what's the board's role in each of these. So is it something they influence and approve? Do they have oversight? Or is it something they own? And the board owns stakeholder management, how they self-evaluate the board dynamics. In other places, it's about influence, advising, and oversight. And then we can look at which superpowers, the ones in green, are more important versus yellow, which is maybe a little less important. Doesn't mean you don't pay attention to it. But if we think about board dynamics, all of the superpowers come into play. If we think about strategy execution, you can see which superpowers come into play. So a board really needs to have all 5. The other thing we talked about, board evaluation. If we agree that future readiness is important and necessary for boards, then the superpowers should be evaluated and made a part of a board's evaluation. And if we look at this, and we look at this board and its board members, we see there's a blind spot with prepared risk takers. So is this something where the board needs additional education, potentially an advisor or someone to facilitate a board meeting to bring these issues to the fore? When they're thinking of the nominating committee, is thinking about what gaps do they need to address in terms of board selection, in terms of potentially who should fill a director who's leaving. And in the same vein, we can look at assessing individual board members. So in this case, if you look at Richard, John, and Alistair, potentially the stale, pale, and male, they're not strong in any of the superpowers. Now, this could be because they need board education, they need some development, or is it because they're so stuck in their ways that they're not willing to change, that they're actually detracting from the value the board brings? And to play off of Toffler's unlearn, learn, and relearn, are there directors that need to be onboarded, and reboarded? Because the fact that you've been on the board for a while doesn't mean you don't need your mindset, your thinking refreshed. So when the superpowers come together, they dampen downside risk and amplify upside return. They increase your probability of success in whitewater. They increase value creation for all. And if you continue to do this, you're going to have sustainable performance, sustainable organizations, because you can keep on handling these issues. So the question is, where would you rather be? Do you want to be on the left, in the boat, ill-equipped for the stormy seas, or do you want to be working for an organization or be part of an organization whose customer where customer needs are met, employees are valued, partners collaborate and work towards everyone's success, and shareholders are richly rewarded. Now, we've covered a lot today, and you're probably wondering, where and how do I start? Well, I've got a couple of suggestions. First of all, is understand where you are. Part of being a present futurist is understanding where you are. And to help you with that, I offer a complimentary future readiness assessment. It takes less than 5 minutes. You can scan this QR code, and you can also use the link, which is future-ready.scoreapp.com. And so when you can access the presentation later, or the ask for the slides, you'll be able to get this again. Now, when you take the assessment, you get your results instantly. And if you're interested in having your team or board assessed, then please get in touch with me and we can arrange that. The second thing, and again, I know we've covered a lot of material, but step 2 is learning how to become future ready with the superpowers. If you're interested in joining an open Become a Future Ready Leader bootcamp, if you would put a comment in the chat to say this is something you'd be interested in considering or joining. And email me if you would like to do something around a master class and a workshop where we actually go through the superpowers and talk about future readiness on your leadership team or board. Shoot me an email. My contact information. Email me if you have any questions on today's presentation, if you have feedback, if you think something's off, and to discuss your future readiness plans. And connect with me on my LinkedIn or through VAB to learn about future events. So let me stop sharing my screen and open up for questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jay. I've also just popped the link in the chat here to the assessment and also to Jay's LinkedIn so everyone can connect. I don't know, Simone, if you're still on the call, I saw that you popped a comment in the chat a little bit earlier, speaking to your experience with boards. Would you like to come on audio and share your thoughts? Simone still here?
Yes. Hello. Sorry. I was writing to Luis. So sorry, can you make that question again?
Yes, so I just wanted to invite you to speak. I know that you had put a comment in the chat earlier in the session.
Oh, yes.
I didn't get the
Okay.
chance to invite you to speak, but you mentioned about your experience with boards and that they're
Yeah.
future strategy.
Well, thank you, Jay, for your presentation. It was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, my experience at the board is, yes, that we look to the future and even work inside the company with the people at the company to draw the strategy, to work on new products, to check, of course, if people and culture is the one that will drive that future. But maybe it's not the experience in all boards. That's my experience. But yeah, we see a lot of failure on that, in big companies. I can't comment, of course, and I don't know the particularities, but my husband is at Boeing right now. Oh. So I believe he has a lot of problems every day. And
Yeah, I mean,
it's a culture. We can see it's a culture thing, I believe.
yeah, and the thing is, when it comes to culture, the board needs to, have its finger on the pulse, so to speak, and the leadership team, for what you're trying to accomplish, for the challenges you're facing, what's most important, what's going to drive that change. So
Yeah.
having that pulse is so important. I appreciate you bringing that up.
What amazed me still today is that if you look through the composition of the boards, like you said, anywhere, in Brazil, in Europe, in the US, and I go to the pages of the companies and I check the board compositions, and it amazed me still today. Sorry for, I am not a financial from a financial background, but if you check most companies, it's only being counters, it's only people from financial backgrounds, and that amazed me that today it's still like that.
It's very much still a challenge, but what we're also seeing is a lot of proof from research from places like the Conference Board, from Gartner, in some of the business publications, large consulting firms like McKinsey, is that board diversity, that diversity in thinking drives
Yeah.
value. And
Yeah.
the board should be adding value. The board should not be detracting value. Same thing goes for the leadership team.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Great,
No,
great.
my pleasure. I appreciate your comments and sharing about Boeing. Other comments or questions? I don't know if Carrie Santos is still on. Carrie works in the, I guess, NGO space with Red Cross. If she's still on, if you can maybe share kind of your perspective.
I think Carrie has had to drop off, unfortunately.
Okay.
Just scanning the the names here. But we have gone just past the hour, so I know that a few people have had to jump to their next meeting.
Okay.
But right, it would have been great to hear her perspective actually and insights. Bertrand has just asked in the chat if we will share the charts. We absolutely will. We'll also have the recording available in the webinar library for you later today or tomorrow as well. Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Jay, for this fabulous education you've just given to us. Thank you so much. Just a very short question here.
Sure.
In the era where things go wrong, right? And of course, when things go wrong, leaders behave differently, especially in the boardroom. They become like could be very barbaric, could be very rude, could be, I mean, it could go somehow very bad. So what elements of these superpowers could really help leaders to really adhere to or use or apply to help themselves? Because when things are going right, everything is, people are like angels, but when things are going wrong, they treat themselves badly, they treat their employee badly, they start backbiting and stabbing each other at the back. So what do you say to that, please?
So a couple of things. There was another maybe presenter, I think it was Andrew Kakabadze, a couple of weeks back, who said that we should be interrogating the issue. What's the issue? Talk about the issue, not about the person. We're all trying to solve that problem. And if you think about being an experienced learner, if we're providing people with a safe environment where they can contribute, where a leader can feel comfortable saying, I don't know it all. I need your help asking questions. And it's the same thing for the board. You know, it's dialing down the adversity and the personal attacks, because that gets nothing. And those very personal attacks very often is why leaders don't learn what they need to know. And they find out things late. And the reason for that, very often they just need to look in the mirror. What did they do the last time somebody brought them bad news, brought up an issue? So when you think about it, I think really two superpowers. One is experienced learner and a lot of the elements there. The second one is accountable collaborator. You know, we need to work together. One person typically is not the root of the problem. That we're in the same boat. If there's a hole under my sink, it's not just my problem. If you're on the boat with me, it's your problem too. So we need to work together. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And, you know, I'm happy to discuss, you know, these things further. Just reach out. Any other questions or comments? So let me just close with this. We know the issue we're facing. We know what happens if we don't change. It's up to us as individuals, as board members, as C-suite members, to bring these ideas back to the group, to say, how can we become more future ready? How can we use a framework like the superpowers to help us see, think, and do differently? You know, as I said, note your interest in the chat if you're interested in having a boot camp around this or joining a boot camp around this. And I encourage you to take the future readiness assessment. Get a sense of where you are, which superpowers you're strong in, which ones you're weak. Think about your organization and how you'd rate them as well. So I want to thank everybody for their time. I look forward to speaking with many of you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jay. It's so great to see so many people here still 10 minutes after the hour and lots of thanks and positive feedback in the chat. So thank you so much again. We'll make sure that the recording is uploaded as soon as possible and the slides are available as well for anyone who would like to revisit the content and go through it in more detail. But thank you so much again, Jay. And thanks everyone for joining and for still being here for this discussion. Thanks,
Have
everyone.
a great
Bye.
day, night, evening. See you all next time.